Hello everyone, welcome to the latest CAS Autumn Event 2020. And this keynote talk today delivered by Rupert Ward on learning fitness, getting learning fit. My name is Tim Wilson and I'm the CAS Community Outreach Manager and host for today's session. We are also joined by my colleague and fellow Community Outreach Manager, Peter Marshman, who is the moderator today and will be monitoring the question window. So just before I introduced Rupert, I have a couple of housekeeping things. So in terms of housekeeping, during the session today, if you use the question window on the right-hand side of your screen, you can use that to ask questions as well as comment. Rupert will no doubt be asking you questions for the session today, so please use the questions window to comment as I say, as well as ask questions. As you'll see, the top of the window has an orange rectangle. This can be expanded or collapsed. So Peter will be making notes of questions posed in the questions window, and these will be answered hopefully as time allows towards the end. We will run a little bit over as we're starting so late today, so apologies about that. If time does not allow, responses will be posted on the CAS forum and across the CAS social media channels. There are two hashtags for the event today. One hashtag is CAS Autumn Event, the other is CAS Virtual 20. I will post Rupert, myself and Pete's Twitter handles in the chat when Rupert begins. And as a quick reminder, as you can probably tell, all attendees are in listen-only mode. So that's the housekeeping. Please, I'm going to introduce Rupert. Rupert Ward is a former project lead at IDEA. He's one of the world's most successful IDEA is one of the world's most successful free educational technologies. Apologies there, Rupert. He is a National Teaching Fellow and Professor of Learning Innovation at the University of Huddersfield. He is also a member of the BCS Accreditation Committee and a former board member of the Council for Professors and Heads of Computing. And I know he is very excited to be delivering this keynote to the CAS Autumn Event today. So enough from me, and over to you, Rupert. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we're going to do a little bit of interaction within this talk. So we've got a poll question which we're going to put in at the beginning, and in terms of answering that, as Tim was saying, please just use the questions bit there. Also ask any questions as you're going along that Tim and Peter can then collate, and we can feed them in at relevant points. And you can also get me on email, so my email address is there as well. So please do connect and do communicate both now and in future as you wish. But let's get started. Let's get on with this talk. So let's start with your brain. The first thing to understand in terms of talking about learning fitness is how we differ from other animals. And the key way in which we differ from other animals is our ability to rationalize. And that takes place in the bit at the front of our brains, which is known as the prefrontal cortex. And there we store information in a fairly rational form, and we use that to make rational decisions. Now, there's some bad news here, which is that our prefrontal cortex only makes up about 30% of our brain, and the rest of it is our evolutionary inheritance. It's what we've developed from being animals. And so a lot of our default emotions and default behaviors are based on our more animalistic elements. And so in a lot of situations, this means we are reactive to immediate opportunities and threats as they arise in the environment. And when we act, we don't always act in a way that's aligned with our long-term rational interests. In fact, quite the opposite. We act quite regularly in irrational ways. And so this talk is going to explore how using learning fitness can help us address some of these issues. And in terms of understanding learning fitness, let's start with where the analogy is based, which is on physical fitness. Now, in physical fitness, what we tend to do is we focus on exercise habits, on motivation, and developing mastery. They play key roles in getting physically fit. And one of the most effective ways of getting physically fit is to have somebody guiding us through that process, to have a personal trainer. And they're able to do several functions. So firstly, they're able to explain what equipment we're using and what exercises we're doing. They're also able to personalize the exercise activities to align with our habits and our motivations. And they're able through this to pass on and develop mastery in us. And what they're looking at when they're doing this personal training is our engagement with the environment and how we're then performing. So what we try and develop in getting physically fit is a mastery of those physical exercises and how we approach them. Now, in a learning context, what we're trying to do when we're developing learning mastery is we're trying to learn how to learn. We're trying to become our own personal trainer in our learning. And what we're going to explore within the topic today is also linked very closely with the current situation that we find ourselves in. So what we've seen during the pandemic is that when we've moved learning activities online, this has been quite tricky. We've not been used to doing that. And if we want to do it well, we can use the principles, the concepts I'm going to discuss to do with learning fitness to help develop better online personalized learning. And in doing that, we can then use and maximize our learning fitness online, but also as we move back away from this more online environment back to a new normal, we're able to then maximize our learning fitness offline as well. So let's go through some of the key principles and topics. So the first one I want to consider is our learning diet, what we consume when we're learning. And we need to ask ourselves really two questions here. Is what we're consuming within our learning healthy for us? And does it enable us to get learning fit? Or we can ask this the opposite way around and say, does what we consume generate learning barriers, so indigestion in a diet context, and does it adversely impact on our health, so physical or mental, or indeed both? So the poll question we've got there is asking you about the barriers that you've faced in your learning, and we're going to come back to them shortly when we're going to start discussing some of the chat topics I want to introduce. So let me, just before we go on to the chat topics, I'm just going to explain some learning theory, and then we'll do the chat topics based on the learning theory. Okay, so the point with understanding how we learn is that how we learn is based on our reaction to our environment. Okay, so it's based on opportunities and threats, and in the case of learning, success and failure. And so let's just go through how we learn. I'll explain this, and on the back of that, then we're going to just go through and discuss a couple of chat areas. Okay, so when we get information from our environment, we sense it. So we get sensory input, and that sensory input then comes in and we have a set of memories. So the first of those is our sensory memory. So it comes straight into our brains, and immediately we assess that information. And what we're trying to do when we assess that information is we're trying to identify, is there an opportunity, or in particular, is there a threat? So this is our traditional fight or flight response. So if something is immediately threatening us, we react emotionally and impulsively to that. And that gives us a survival advantage. It means we can respond quickly, and those few seconds or tenths of seconds in terms of that response leads to us having greater chance of survival. Okay, so evolutionarily it makes perfect sense. In a modern situation, it causes a lot of challenges in terms of our mental health and in terms of our learning. We'll come back to those in a minute. So assuming the input that we get from our environment isn't something that highlights an immediate threat, the information goes into our working memory, which is effectively our in-tray. And we can cope with a certain amount of information coming in at the same time. So that's our cognitive load. And as long as we're under our maximum cognitive load, we can take that information and we can work out where it's going to need filing. So it goes from our in-tray and it goes then through a filing process. And that filing process starts straight away. So we start learning straight away, but that filing process can go on for days, weeks, months. And a lot of the filing actually occurs when we're asleep. We make sense of our learning when we're asleep. And so the information goes from our in-tray to our filing cabinet. So our long-term memory is our filing cabinet. And there it's stored semi-permanently while it's still being usefully used and accessed. And it's stored as snippets, as patterns and bits of information that we can then reuse at a later date. So basically, it's a bit like a file compression format. And then when we reconstruct it again, we're trying to put those bits of information back together. Now, that's not an entirely accurate process either way. So we don't necessarily store the information perfectly, and we certainly don't then reconstruct the information perfectly. We also don't necessarily always access the right information. So we've got some challenges in terms of our brain doesn't really work perfectly in terms of managing how we learn. In most situations, that's fine. Certainly, evolutionarily, it's been fine. But as we ask more of it, we need to be better at doing it. Okay, so basically, our default fitness is reasonable in terms of how we are able to exercise. But in a modern high fitness world, we're really struggling with this. So we'll discuss some of these issues as we go along. And then in terms of our long-term memory, we have two main bits. We have an implicit system one, which is automated, which we have very little control over. So that's got our emotions within it. And we've got an explicit system two, which is where we are recording a lot of the higher level information that we need. So let me just talk through an example to show you how some of this information goes in. So imagine you're learning to drive a car. The information comes in through sensory input. The sensory memory bit, you may be scared of moving in a car, driving a car for the first time, but assuming you get over that, the information goes into working memory. And from there, you're trying to develop motor skills and understanding about how to drive. So initially, the cognitive load is very high. You're trying to do things you're not familiar with. But as you become more familiar, you build new procedures, new habits, and they get stored in your implicit system one memory. So then what happens is when you've been driving for a while, you can drive from one place to another and have no memory of what happened. Or you can drive from one place to another and you can talk to somebody while you're doing it. Or you can think about something else while you're doing it because your cognitive load is much lower and the procedures are hardwired in. Okay, so that's the implicit side of system one. On the system two side, what you've got is you've got episodic memory, which is snippets about events. So key bits of information about what has occurred. And again, those memories of events are really not accurately recorded. So if you're asked at a later date to recall what happened, it's very rare that we can accurately and fully recollect what has happened. Okay, so that's episodic memory, which is about events. And then our semantic memory is about how the information connects together. And it does that at two levels. So we make connections between bits of information. So a new bit of information and an existing bit, for example. And we make a conceptual map of how lots of bits of information fit together. So in terms of our learning, there's a useful analogy we can use here, which is that of a website. So within a website, you would have the web pages, which is the day-to-day information that's on the website. Okay, so that's effectively your habits, your procedural memory. You then have two lots of semantic memory. So you have hyperlinks between web pages, so you don't have to record the same information twice. And you have a site map, which is how all the different web pages fit together. And then when you're getting new information in, you need to work out how it works within that website. So you need to be able to search the website, find the information that way, and you need to be able to work out, does this need to be a new web page? Does it need to be a new hyperlink? Do I already know something about this? Or do I need to review my site map? So that's how we learn in general. Now, there's a set of implications from this, which we're going to explore, but one of them I just want to do while we've got this diagram up, which is the link between episodic memory and emotional memory. So basically between events and emotions. Now, when we experience things, if something is significant to us, we have a connection between the event and the emotion. And usually what happens is that our process of reflection, our process of processing learning means that events and emotions get decoupled, so that you can recall an event, but you don't have the emotion associated with it. But in many cases, those connections still remain. And this, again, it's an evolutionary tendency, but it has quite profound impact on what we do. So one area has profound impact is in trauma, where not being able to disconnect events and emotions leads to re-experiencing the same thing over again. A less drastic learning relevant context for this is something such as exam anxiety. So if you imagine somebody has done badly in an exam, they will have an emotional connection with an event, i.e. with an exam. When they're asked to do another exam, that will trigger an emotional response to the event. And as you can probably see from the diagram, those emotions can govern the behavior that occurs, far more so than the rational side about the exam. So even though it was a different exam, unless we can rationalize through the link between exams and anxiety, then we are going to continue to get anxious when we have exams. So we're not going to be able to perform at our best. We're not going to be able to optimize our learning fitness because the emotional connection to that gets in the way, because we've not been able to reflect well enough to address that. Okay, and so if we're trying to develop proper learning fitness, if we're trying to develop expertise in learning fitness, we need to be able to reflect effectively on what we do, and in particular at the high level, at the conceptual level, where we abstract information and we look at the site map and we review the site map. And ultimately, learning, really effective learning, is about efficient and effective filing of information and retrieval of it. So having a really good filing cabinet, well-organized filing cabinet, a good site map, and being able to find the right information within there. So being able to search it effectively and to find the information we need to connect to new input. Okay, and that's it. That's what learning is. Now, as we've just touched on, one of the key challenges there is how we manage our emotions, and extending that, how we manage ourselves. So being able to self-regulate is incredibly important if we're to be able to do high quality reflection on our learning and to be able to manage our reactions to our environment, our mental, physical, and emotional reactions to our environment. And so to master our learning, we need to master ourselves. We need to self-regulate. And so what I'd like to do now is to just explore some chat topics here, some areas. So we've got potential emotional reactions you've had where you've experienced educational barriers. What I'd also like to have an understanding from you about is any examples where you feel you've struggled to learn because of emotional responses, or you've been particularly proud because you've achieved something through learning, you've managed to self-regulate, and indeed examples of where you've been able to use these techniques. So basically you've been able to understand things better, or you've been able to commit to doing something, or you've developed some resilience from what you've done, or you've become better organized in terms of your learning. So when have you really learned about your learning? I guess that's where we're looking at. So I don't know if Tim and Peter want to come back in with any comments at this point.
Peter, are there any comments yet?
No, Rupert, no comments coming in yet. So do get. Oh, just had a comment coming through. So someone's we've just got a comment about juggling childcare of a 20-month-old and working from home. So lots of self-regulation there, I'm sure, Rupert.
Okay, that's a good one. That okay. So I've just sent a message to next door actually, because they've got a young child, and I was a little concerned with that. So I sympathise in terms of challenge for that. Okay, so there's a few points here just based on what we've talked about so far, and we'll see in the rest of it. Okay, so the first one is cognitive load. So you've got to be in a position where you're not overwhelmed by cognitive load to be able to learn and to process, right? So if you've got distractions of various types, so childcare, or you're unwell, or you have high levels of stress at work, whatever, things like that, then your cognitive load's going to go up. And as your cognitive load goes up, you become less able to function effectively. Okay, so using the physical fitness analogy, if you're asking more of your body, there's less of your body able to exert maximum performance. Okay, so I think the first bit is be very aware of how limited your ability to perform is. Okay, and we're going to come on to that in the talk. Okay, and then beyond there, what you need to be thinking about is, how do you maintain a positive direction of travel? And again, we're going to come on to that in the talk. So what I'll do is I'll start progressing through, and I'll bring that in as the example that I'm showing to demonstrate these concepts that I'm going through, because it's a really useful one to show this. If people have any other questions we're going through, please add them in, and then please do chip in with further chats or comments as we're doing it, because I can use these examples in exhibiting and explaining the concepts. Okay, so let's move on, and I'll answer that as we go through. Okay. Okay, so just to finish off the bit about self-regulation, I just want to talk through the theory of self-regulated learning and how it impacts on what we do. So again, environmental input is provided, and we respond to that. Okay, so within our self-regulated learning cycle, what we do is we review what has happened previously to us to inform what we're going to do in future. So basically, previous experience informs our current perceptions, and those current perceptions govern what we expect of ourselves and how we plan. And that expectations and planning impacts on what we attempt and therefore what we achieve. And that performance then feeds back in as experience for future input. So when it comes to next time round, we review what we did last time, and then we reperceive based on that. Okay, so basically this is an iterative loop, a positive or negative iterative loop. So let's take that example. Let's take the juggling childcare and learning example. Okay, because we can do this loop with that. Okay, so if you've got a study deadline, and last time you sat down, you got disturbed because you understandably had childcare commitments. Okay, then your perception might be, there's no point in me doing my studies. I might as well give up, or I might as well just do the minimum I need to, because I'm not going to achieve. Okay, so then you plan accordingly, you perform accordingly, and you have a self-fulfilling prophecy there. Okay, another approach though is you've got exactly the same thing. Last time I sat down, I couldn't do it, the childcare commitments. Okay, can I do it differently? Can I reflect on what I did last time, and can I come up with a different solution? So the different solution might be, okay, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to study only when I know I'm going to have dedicated periods of time and when I can learn effectively. And I'm not going to expect too much of myself. I'm not going to expect perfection, but I realize that any studying I do improves my learning fitness, that I'm getting fitter by the process of learning exercise. So then I plan to do let's say one 30-minute learning period every other day. And then I perform. Can I do that? Is that too much? Is it too little? I then review it and I say, okay, well, look, actually, I could do that and it was fine and it worked. So should I try and do a bit more? So it's like increasing the weights on a gym machine. Okay, so, or increasing the amount of distance you run. So people doing a couch to 5K, for example, are doing this same sort of process. They are gradually and incrementally increasing how much exercise they do until they're able to do a lot more than they started doing. And that's what we do within learning is you have to believe to succeed. And so the more you can foster belief through positive feedback loops, the better. And in fact, if the audience are aware of this, there's some reasonably famous work in learning by a lady called Carol Dweck on fixed and growth mindsets. And this is exactly what this is. Basically, a fixed mindset is where you set limited expectations because you're worried about failure. So basically, you don't think you can perform and achieve, so you build a system so that you can't fail. Okay, whereas a growth mindset is you're not worried about the failure. You see the test as being an opportunity, a challenge to grow. And so a growth mindset is there about saying, okay, well, look, don't beat myself up about this. I can learn more by the process of doing this than by the result. So, so in fitness terms, it's not about your performance itself. It's about the fact that you're improving your performance. Okay, so let's just explore a few more concepts, and then I'm going to bring all of this together. So one of them, in terms of going online, so online learning, or even online exercise for that matter, is that being online, we don't have all the emotional cues that we get when we're face to face with people. And so being online feels more isolating, and it can feel more disconnected. And so if you're trying to learn online, then there's a real danger there of your emotions getting the better of you, and in particular frustration. So if you're feeling that you can't make progress, and you're frustrated in the amount of progress you're making, so for example you're being disrupted all the time through childcare, then it's very easy to disengage. So really the point here is, how do we manage those emotions? So one way is to come up with, to reflect on why we're feeling that and to question that. Another way is to think about how we plan in strategies to avoid that frustration and that disengagement. And one of the best ones is just not to beat yourself up, and to maintain and sustain. So to develop a commitment and a resilience through just saying, okay, this is not something I need to internalize emotionally. I just need to focus on doing the basics and building it up from there. And then tied in with the frustration, which is an emotional barrier, we can also put in place a lot of other barriers to our fitness and to our learning. And really, certainly for online learning, but just in learning in general, we really need to be removing these learning barriers. And the reason for this is, when you look at the earlier bits I went through in terms of learning theory and emotions and responses, if we are not able to rationalize, so if we are using our emotional, impulsive, evolutionary behavioral responses without rationalizing the barriers, and all we're doing is we're programming negative behavior into our learning processes. We're increasing the chances of disengagement and demotivation. We're reducing our self-esteem. We're reducing the chance of us performing at our best. There's no harm in challenges per se, but they have to be provided when we're able to rationalize and to overcome those challenges. And messages of failure persist. If we do not reduce and remove those, then we don't get the maximum throughput of people learning. So to use a physical exercise analogy, the learning gym shame is significant, and it stops people going to the learning gym. It stops them getting fit. And one of the key challenges within our educational systems in particular is that they were built the best part of 150 years ago, and certainly curriculum-wise, there's been very little change in the last 100 years. And what that means is that we've still got a system built on selection. And that's increasingly problematic in the modern world, because we need people that can deal with the complexity of the modern social world, the modern information and knowledge economy. And to do that, we need to learn more. And so actually what the educational systems need to be based on is not selection. We don't care about comparison of one person to another while you're learning. We might do it at the end, but we certainly don't need it as we're going through. What we need is to maximize performance. We need to maximize progress so that more of us get learning fit. And then if we're required to select because of job roles and what we're trying to do, then that's fine. But we've got a bigger pool to pick from there. We've got a better average fitness. And if we're looking at how we get that through, one of the key evolutionary tendencies that we need to think about within this is that we are all motivated to master things. We all want to do things well. And so really our learning processes should enable us to do things well. And we want to learn, right? So providing methods and ways in which we can be motivated to learn is incredibly powerful. We can make lots of progress. We can amplify that progress through the positive feedback loops of self-regulated learning. But we can also negatively reinforce and negatively amplify, stunt progress, and demotivate learners. Okay, so we really do need to think very, very carefully about the barriers. Another thing that we need to think about is how we engage socially as groups and how we develop good learning habits socially. And one of the really powerful things with social learning, which going online has been a challenge with, but we can still do to some extent, is social support and social engagement. You know, having people around you, feeling part of a group, for a lot of people increases their motivation. You know, so going to the gym on your own compared to going to the gym with other people or going to gym classes, there's a big difference there. But for learning, one of the other key points, and arguably one of the key points that we need to be addressing in education, is that social learning gives an opportunity to reflect as a group, to understand each other's perspectives, and to change our own perceptions. And that process of being able to learn socially within education is profoundly important to where we go in the next 50, 100 years as a society. Because if we can understand each other better, and in particular if we can understand ourselves better, we're better able to make more rational decisions in our learning and in our lives than irrational and impulsive and often counterproductive and damaging behaviors. Another thing that we are able to do more and more as we develop online learning is to track progress. And you've seen this in physical fitness in terms of increasing activity trackers. And what the benefit of that is if we can measure the right things and we can track and understand learning performance, again, based on mastery motivation, the more you feel you're making progress, the more you can see you're making progress, the more you can respond to that, and the more informed you are about the progress you are making. Now, one key area where there's a problem currently is that there is very poor educational tracking between different sectors of education. So going primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, there really is no real link there in terms of performance, only endpoint assessment and progress into the next level of learning. So there's a real lack of continuity there, and it's something where learning analytics in particular can provide us with benefits going forward. So let's just put this all together, and then I'm going to bring this to a close. So not long ago, doing a marathon in under 2 hours seemed impossible. And yet it's been done. And how was it done? It was done through the right diet, the right tracking, the right social support, people running with the runner, developing expertise, understanding what you're doing, monitoring progress, removing barriers, and through self-regulation. Okay, so we can achieve great things when we combine these principles. And if we combine them within our learning, we can become our own personal trainers in terms of our learning. We can become personalized learners. So you can read more about this if you want to in my books. The one on the left there, there's a special discount code at the moment that you can use, Emerald 30. So you can go on the Emerald website and get that if you're interested. The other one is available on Amazon. So I'd just like to finish with a bit more about idea, really. You know, it's an inspiring story in itself. So 5 years ago, It's part of a small team that developed IDEA, and now it's one of the world's most successful educational technologies. In the first 5 weeks of lockdown in the UK this year, over 1 million digital badges were completed on IDEA as everybody rushed online. And what it demonstrates is if you design learning right, people are motivated to learn. And if we focus on personalized learning, removing learning barriers, we can improve learning fitness. IDEA is now used in approximately 95% of the countries around the world. And there's no reason really why the principles I've talked about today can't be used as an opportunity to review how we learn during the pandemic threat. And through that, we can focus on developing better collective learning fitness. We can have better learning diets, and we can perform more effectively in our learning. And that benefits everybody. It benefits our self-esteem, our lifetime achievement. It reduces threats in society. It enables us to understand each other better and to develop more effectively. And that can have profound impacts both on our individual and group learning and on society as a whole. So if you'd like to find out a bit more about this, I'm doing a CAS chat on Twitter this evening at 8 p.m. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you for listening, and please do ask any questions.
Rupert, thank you very much. Before I do a sum up, we do have some comments, don't we, Pete? I think in the
yeah, that's right. There's so, to start off with, Rupert, some wonderful comments about how much people have enjoyed it and how useful they found your presentation. So I think definitely start with that. But there's a really interesting one about sort of the difficulty to prioritize priorities when all of your priorities seem to be, you know, very high level. So I just wondered if you had sort of a reflection on that comment at all.
So I'm asking too much. Okay, right. So okay. So the key bit really is reflection and developing the right site maps. Okay. So it's about abstraction. What if you want to be a learning fitness expert, you need to understand how learning fits together. So basically, when you learn new things, you need to be able to file it in your filing cabinet properly. Okay, so the key take home there is if you compare experts to novices, the difference between experts and novices is experts spend longer analysing and longer testing and reviewing and less time doing. All right, so basically what that means is they're able to understand how new information fits with what they've already got. And as they get that new information in, once they work out where it fits, they know what they need to do, right? Whereas novices, they're still trying to make sense of how it all fits together. Yeah. So the key priority really is reflect on your learning, reflect on the concepts I've talked about, and think about how your conceptual models work for your learning and how you then fit new information into that. Yeah, and then you become a quicker learner. You're able to learn things more quickly. You manage your learning better. You're calmer, you're more relaxed, you're more self-regulated on it. It's less confusing, and there's less cognitive load. So you've got more time and more opportunity then to process new information effectively.
Great, thank you, Rupert. And there was another one around, just because you've just mentioned about performance, and there was a comment around sort of the fear of performing when you've had an experience, for example, someone looking over you while you've been teaching, and then how do you overcome that when you might be, you know, when you might need to be doing that with someone else and not wanting to put that fear on someone else? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about emotions and events and the connection therein, right? So you need to be able to decouple that, and the decoupling comes through talking about it. It comes through reevaluating your perceptions. So again, through talking with others, that's really important. It comes through desensitizing. So for example, experiencing a similar experience but slightly less scary experience. You know, so yes, I mean, we always have these challenges. We always have things. Some of it we find it very hard to decouple from. Okay, so some we just have to accept, but there's a lot that actually we can manage, you know, and we can understand and we can reconceptualize. And if we put the effort into doing that, to reflecting and saying, look, is this, you know, for example, you know, I don't like standing up in front of the class. I get quite anxious doing it. Okay, what strategies can we put in place to deal with that? So one strategy could be at the beginning of the class, you go around and chat to some of the pupils, to some of the students, and you start finding out some bits of information that they can share to other people in the class. So something it's not always about you, it can be about them, and they can share things. You know, you can think about how you can pace things within what you do, you know, and also then thinking about where anxiety or stress or those sort of things come from, because you can get to a point where that's so overwhelming to your cognitive load that you can't actually process effectively because you're spending too much time on the immediate threat to grasp the long-term opportunity. So there's a real, you know, there's a real challenge there, and that needs to be managed.
Great. I'm mindful of the time, so that's really, yeah, I think we're going to sum up now, Rupert, because I think just mindful of the time and where we're at. So I apologize to some of our attendees who didn't get their comments read out, but I think that a lot of the comments are echoing.
Tim, they've got my email address. I'll put it back up.
Absolutely, thank you.
Well.
And a copy of the handout, you should be able to get a copy of the handout in the PDF format to download as well. So please do that. And Rupert's details are on that handout as well. But he's put the slide up.
And there's some notes in there as well for further information. So.
Brill, thank you. So I just want to say thank you, Rupert. I think I'm reflecting. I'm still reflecting a little bit on the bit that you did about how learning works and how we recall and how we store information and the reasons behind it, and then the sort of the impact, the emotion. And I reflect on my own journey from someone who used to worry ridiculously about his exams or my exams and how I was when I was, you know, 16, 18, and how I've learned to deal with that and how I've changed as a person over the decades. It's just really fascinating to use that as an example because it immediately brought those alarm bells back from when I was doing my GCSEs and A-levels, I think. So it was, yeah, really fascinating talk. So at the end of this webinar, you will all get a short survey which will appear on screen. And as always, please take a moment to complete the survey. We really want to know what you thought. So yeah, please do the survey. Some of you have asked this already, but a recording of this webinar will be available on the CAS website after this session, so look out for that. There are still 2 events left in the CAS Autumn event. Tomorrow there's a secondary cyber special event, and on Thursday, I think it's Pete that's hosting this one with Maggie Philbin. So please do tune in on for Thursday for that as well. But other than that, thank you so much, Rupert, and thank you, Pete, for being my support person today. And I hope that you all have a lovely evening. So thank you and bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.